The puppy tried to bite the man who picked him up, snapping hard with small, sharp teeth that did not match his thin, shaking body. His growls sounded wrong, too deep for something so young. The crowd at the feed store laughed when the cowboy dropped him back into the crate. Someone said the dog was bad from birth and would never be worth the trouble. Another said he would be dead by nightfall. The cowboy did not laugh. He leaned closer and looked into the puppy's wide, wild eyes and saw fear hiding behind the anger. The cowboy reached into his pocket and placed a single coin on the crate. 25 cents changed hands. The deal was done. No one there believed the cowboy would keep the dog past sundown. The cowboy's name was Caleb Turner. He lived alone on a small ranch outside the town of Red Hollow, Arizona. The land was dry and flat, with mesquite trees scattered across hard soil on a long fence that sang low in the wind. Caleb had lost much in his life. His wife had faded away from sickness. His best horse had died from a bad fall. He did not speak much in town after that. He worked hard, paid fair, and kept to himself. When Caleb saw the puppy locked in a crate at the feed store that morning, thin and snapping like a trapped thing, something inside him stirred. The store owner told him the truth without pride or shame. The pup had been found near a burned shack north of town. There was no sign of the mother. The puppy snapped at hands and refused food unless it was shoved through the bars. 3 buyers had already returned him. One man claimed the dog went for his throat. The owner said he just wanted the problem gone. Caleb listened without judgment. He nodded once and asked the price. The owner laughed and said a quarter would do. Caleb paid and carried the crate outside. The ride home was rough. The puppy paced inside the crate, barking and slamming his body into the wood. Dust rose behind the wagon as the sun climbed higher. Caleb kept his hands steady on the reins. He spoke in a calm voice, telling the puppy they were going home. The words did not matter as much as the tone. By the time they reached the ranch, the barking stopped. The puppy watched through the slats with bright, unsure eyes. Caleb set the crate near the barn, far from the house. He filled a bowl with water and slid it close. The puppy lunged and snapped, spilling it. Caleb did not move. He waited and set the bowl again. This time the puppy drank fast and messy, as if the water might be taken away. Caleb left food nearby and walked off. He did not try to touch the dog. He knew fear could not be rushed. Night fell with the sound of coyotes howling in the distance. The puppy cried once, then went silent. Caleb lay awake in his small house, staring at the ceiling and listening for trouble. None came. At dawn, Caleb returned to the barn. The food was gone. The bowl was empty. The puppy watched him with ears flat and body tight. Caleb smiled just a little. Days passed with the same steady rhythm. Caleb brought food at the same times each day. He sat near the crate and read from an old book, not to teach but to be present. The puppy learned the sound of his boots and the pace of his steps. The growling softened into low warnings. The snapping slowed. One morning, the puppy took food from Caleb's hand through the bars, fast as a strike, then jumped back. Caleb did not react. He nodded and walked away. Men in town asked why he kept a bad dog. They warned him he would regret it. Caleb listened and said nothing. He had learned that pain made creatures sharp. He had also learned that patience could dull the edge. A week later, Caleb opened the crate door and stepped back. The puppy bolted into the corner of the pen, teeth bared and body shaking. Caleb sat on the ground and waited. The sun moved across the dirt. Flies buzzed. At last, the puppy stopped shaking. He crept forward, sniffed the air, then rushed back again. Caleb did not move. When night came, the puppy slept in the open crate with the door wide. Caleb named him Rusty for the red tint in his coat that showed when the light hit just right. Rusty did not answer to the name yet. He answered only to hunger and fear. By the end of the first month, Rusty followed Caleb at a distance. He learned the fence line and the smells of the barn. He learned the sound of the dinner bell and the shape of Caleb's shadow. He still growled at strangers and hid from sudden noise. Caleb accepted this. He worked slow and steady, letting trust build like a fence post set deep in hard ground. One afternoon, a rider passed the ranch and shouted a greeting. Rusty charged the fence, snarling and wild. Caleb stepped between them and raised his hand. He did not yell. He did not strike. He spoke Rusty's name. The puppy froze, confused by the calm, then backed away with eyes locked on Caleb's face. That night, Caleb sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Rusty lay a few steps away, watching the dark. The wind carried the smell of distant rain. Caleb felt a thin but real hope rise in his chest. He had seen change before, slow and earned. Still, he could not know what waited ahead, or how the next 3 months would test everything he believed about fear, loyalty, and the cost of a single quarter. The second month began with a small change Caleb did not expect. Rusty started waiting at the porch in the mornings. Not close, not touching, but near enough to watch every move Caleb made. His body stayed low, ready to run if needed, yet his eyes followed Caleb with a focus that had not been there before. When Caleb stood, Rusty stood. When Caleb walked, Rusty followed a few steps behind like a shadow that had not learned to trust the light. Caleb kept the same routine. Mornings meant feeding, checking fences, and riding out to the north field. Rusty stayed near the barn at first, pacing and whining when Caleb rode away. One day, Caleb turned back and found the young dog trailing behind the horse, tongue hanging out, legs working hard to keep up. Caleb slowed the horse and let Rusty walk beside him. It felt like a small victory, quiet but deep. Training came without force. Caleb used his voice, and his hands slow and steady. Sit meant sit. Stay meant wait. Rusty learned fast. His sharp edge made him alert, ready, eager to understand. Still, the fear remained. A slammed gate sent him into panic. A raised voice made him crouch and growl. Caleb learned to read the signs. The stiff tail. The ears pulled back. The trembling that ran through Rusty's legs like a warning signal. Caleb adjusted, always patient, always calm. People in Red Hollow began to notice. Men at the feed store asked about the dog with less laughter in their voices. Some shook their heads and said a bad dog stayed bad. One man, Frank Miller, spat on the ground and told Caleb he was wasting his time. He warned him Rusty would turn on him one day. Caleb met Frank's eyes and said nothing. Words did not build trust. Time did. One hot afternoon, trouble came fast. Caleb was fixing a loose board on the far fence when a rattlesnake struck at the post near his hand. The sound was sharp and sudden. Rusty lunged without thinking. He threw himself between Caleb and the snake, barking and snapping. The snake struck again, missing Rusty's chest by inches. Caleb grabbed a rock and ended it in one quick blow. When it was over, Rusty stood shaking from head to paw. His chest rose and fell in fast bursts. He did not run. He pressed himself against Caleb's leg, trembling hard. Caleb knelt slowly and placed a hand on Rusty's head. Rusty stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed with a long breath. It was the first time he did not pull away. Caleb felt the young dog's heart pounding through his fur. He stayed there until the shaking stopped. Something shifted that day. Not all the fear was gone, but a line had been crossed. Rusty had chosen him. After that, Rusty slept near the porch each night. He ate from Caleb's hand without snapping. He still watched strangers with sharp eyes, but he listened when Caleb spoke. The bond between them grew stronger, steady and quiet, like roots finding water after a long drought. Then the storm came. Dark clouds rolled in from the east, heavy and fast. The sky grew dark in the middle of the day. Thunder cracked across the land, shaking the windows of Caleb's small house. The wind tore at the fence line. Rusty panicked at the first lightning flash. He bolted into the open field, running wild with fear. Caleb ran after him, calling his name, but the rain swallowed his voice. Rusty disappeared into the tall grass and was gone. By nightfall, Caleb could no longer see more than a few steps in front of him. He searched until his boots sank in mud and the lantern shook in his hand. He followed the tracks Rusty left, thin lines in the soaked ground, but the storm washed them away. The rain fell harder. The wind screamed through the trees. At last, Caleb had to stop. He returned home soaked and silent, his chest tight with worry and regret. He sat by the window all night, listening to the storm, blaming himself. He thought of the crate at the feed store and the fear in Rusty's eyes. He wondered if he had pushed too far, too fast. At dawn, exhausted and numb, Caleb saddled his horse and rode back into the storm-soaked land. He searched every trail and every piece of broken ground. By noon, he found Rusty near the ravine's edge, trapped on a narrow ledge halfway down a steep drop. The young dog was covered in mud, one leg bleeding, eyes dull with pain and fear. Caleb dismounted and spoke softly, moving closer inch by inch. He tested every step. The ground shifted under his boots. One wrong move could send them both falling. Rusty whimpered when Caleb reached out, but he did not snap. He let Caleb lift him into his arms. The climb back was slow and dangerous. Rocks slid under Caleb's feet. His hands slipped. His muscles burned. He held Rusty tight and did not let go. When they reached level ground, Caleb collapsed to his knees, holding the dog against his chest. Rusty did not fight. He pressed his face into Caleb's shirt and stayed there. Caleb carried him home and cleaned the wound. The leg was hurt, but not broken. Rusty lay still, trusting him completely for the first time. Caleb felt a heavy weight lift from his heart. He believed the worst was behind them. He was wrong. 3 months had nearly passed since the day of the quarter. Rusty's fear had eased. His trust had grown. But soon the town of Red Hollow would see a side of Rusty that none of them expected. And Caleb would learn a truth that would shake him to his core. A truth that would change how everyone saw the dangerous puppy who once snapped at every hand that came near. The 3rd month ended on a bright morning in Red Hollow. Caleb had not planned to take Rusty into town, but when he loaded the wagon, Rusty climbed in on his own. The young dog sat tall now, no longer shaking at every sound. His leg had healed, though he still stepped careful at times. His coat looked fuller, the red tint catching the sun. His eyes were alert but calm. Caleb hesitated. Town was full of noise, strangers, and memories Rusty carried deep in his bones. But the dog did not look afraid. He looked ready. Caleb let him stay. The wagon rolled into Red Hollow as the day warmed. Horses stamped. Women carried baskets from the general store. Men talked aloud in the street. Dust lifted in small clouds under wagon wheels. When Rusty jumped down beside Caleb, heads turned right away. Some of the men recognized the dog at once. They remembered the snapping teeth and wild eyes from the feed store crate. A few stepped back. One man laughed and told Caleb he was brave to bring that trouble into town. Rusty stayed close to Caleb's leg. His body was tense, but he did not growl. When a child ran past shouting, Rusty flinched, but instead of snapping, he looked up at Caleb. Caleb placed a steady hand on the dog's head. Rusty stayed still. The men watching fell quiet. Frank Miller pushed through the crowd. He pointed at Rusty and raised his voice so everyone could hear him. He said the dog was dangerous. He said Rusty should be put down before someone got hurt. People around him nodded. Fear spreads fast in small places, and memory spreads faster. Frank stepped closer, lifting his hand like he meant to scare the dog. Rusty did not attack. He did not run. He stood his ground, barked one sharp bark, then stopped when Caleb spoke his name. The sound of Caleb's voice worked like a rope, pulling Rusty back to calm. People stared. This was not the same broken pup they had seen before. That was when an old woman near the well gasped and dropped her bundle of cloth. She stepped forward with trembling hands and stared at Rusty like she had seen a ghost. She said the dog was not bad. She said she had seen him before. The town fell silent. Even the horses seemed to stop moving. The old woman told them what happened 3 months earlier. Her neighbor's place had burned in the middle of the night. The man who lived there had kept dogs for fighting, cruel dogs trained with pain. When the fire broke out, one dog had dragged a small puppy through the flames and carried him away from the burning house. That puppy was Rusty. The mother dog had died. The fighting dogs were gone. The man who owned them died in the fire. Rusty had escaped only because another dog saved him, dragging him through smoke and burning boards. Afterward, the puppy had been found by frightened townsmen who did not know his past. They tried to catch him with ropes and sticks. They hurt him without meaning to. His snapping and biting were not evil. It was survival. The crowd shifted. Shame moved across some faces. Others looked away. The old woman knelt and whispered that she never thought she would see that puppy alive and calm. She said Caleb must have done something close to a miracle. Caleb felt the truth settle slow and heavy in his chest. All the fear, all the teeth, all the trembling. It was not anger, it was memory. Frank Miller said nothing now. His face tightened. He backed up a step, then turned and walked through the crowd without a word. The sheriff stepped forward and crouched at Rusty's level. Rusty watched him but did not growl. His eyes flicked toward Caleb. Caleb gave a small nod. Rusty held still. The sheriff stood and cleared his throat. He said there would be no talk of harm. He said every creature deserved a second chance, especially one that never had a first. Caleb left town with Rusty riding proudly in the wagon. The sun was low, turning the land gold. The wind felt warm on Rusty's coat. For the first time, he did not look behind him as they rolled away from Red Hollow. When they reached the ranch, Rusty jumped down and ran the fence line with new strength. He lifted his head high, tail moving with a soft, steady beat. Caleb watched with a smile he had not felt in years. Rusty returned to him and sat at his feet, looking up with full trust, clear and simple. Caleb reached down and rested his hand on Rusty's neck. Rusty leaned into the touch, no fear left in him. That night, the coyotes howled across the hills. Rusty did not hide. He listened and lay down beside Caleb's boots, calm and sure, guarding the porch like he had been born to do it. Caleb stared out at the dark land, thinking how close he had come to walking past the crate at the feed store. He thought of the thin, angry puppy with shaking legs and wild eyes. 3 months had changed them both. Caleb had learned that broken things were not always dangerous. Sometimes they just needed someone to stand still and offer kindness without asking for anything in return. People in Red Hollow would talk about the dangerous puppy bought for a quarter. They would say Caleb was lucky. But Caleb knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. Rusty had never needed luck. He had only needed a man willing to see past the teeth and into the heart that waited behind them.